So my name is Christine Jones, and I am here representing RILA, Restoration Immigration Legal Aid, a ministry that grew out of our church, Restoration Anglican Church in Arlington, Virginia. And RILA exists to provide legal assistance to the most marginalized and those with the least resources in the Washington, D.C. area. And so today I just want to tell the story of that journey, why our church decided to engage in legal aid and how it revitalized our church and all the cool and messy stories that have come out of this doing legal aid as a parish church. So RILA primarily serves asylum seekers. So there are plenty of immigration clinics, especially in the DC area, that focus on like triage, might help with a quick status adjustment or something like that, but not necessarily the long haul of immigration, asylum seekers, immigrants who are asylum seekers, of which we're hearing a lot about now because many at the southern border are seeking asylum. So that's my intro, and I'm really glad you guys are all here. But to start with immigration, because it can be such a divisive topic and can be such a political topic, I want to back up a little bit and just think about decision making, because when you see throngs of people at the border, you wonder, why did they come? What's going on? So let's back up and think about, have any of you, or at least I know I have, looked at a neighbor or friend or someone in your church and wondered, why'd you make that decision? Why does that decision seem strange? I'm sure I would never make that decision as a parent. Of course, before I'm a parent, then you change your mind. So there are a lot of topics that are like that, coalesce. Do you homeschool or not? Do you go to a private or a Christian university? Do you, all those things that cause tensions. But often if it's a good friend and then you interact with that good friend, you might still disagree with them, but you kind of get a sense about why they're in that particular decision-making process themselves. So now with immigrants at the border, they're so different from us. Sometimes it's hard to get a grasp on why they're making the decisions that they are making and why they're choosing to come to the States specifically, but also just the other decisions that are all wrapped around that. And so it's really hard sometimes to think about why they're making that decision. And we were the same way in our church. We'd hear about the immigration crisis and there were immigration nearby, but because they were sort of far from us, we couldn't really engage in why they were making those decisions. And they often kind of seemed like a flat stereotype decision-making crowd. Now, the problem is that here's our church, Restoration Anglican Church, and we live in Metro DC. So even though experientially immigrants are far from us, geographically, they're our neighbors. They're right down the street. And our Restoration desires to see broken people restored by grace. That's like our tagline and our mission. And we wanted to reach out to people who've been broken. We want to show them that restoration of grace. And we also want to be good neighbors. But Restoration, and a couple of you have been in my church in Restoration, so it skews pretty white, very overeducated, very competent decision makers, so no jokes about DC decision makers, but Northern Virginia, pretty high caliber population. And yet our immigrant neighbors weren't necessarily being represented in our pews. So, but yet we feel called to care for those who are at their least. That's the whole point of we're all broken. And so when someone else is broken, let's enter into their story, right? And let them enter into our story when we're broken. So, and as you can see, our neighbors were not being reflected in our Sunday attendance. So now, this whole our neighbors aren't in our pews, and one of our early, as a church plant, one of our early projects was Love Arlington. That's what we called like reaching out to our neighbors. We're going to love Arlington. And that really started a discernment process of like, what does it look like to love Arlington, to love these immigrants who are in our community, are so different from us, but yet aren't in our pews? How can we reach out to them? So early on, there was like a team of us have been thinking around legal aid and helping immigrants, as maybe that's an option. The Archbishop, Bob Duncan at the time, had put a call out to like, hey, maybe churches can help through immigration legal aid. But we weren't committed to that, but we went around and we started asking neighbors. We had a bunch of Spanish speakers in our church, and we went out and we interviewed our neighbors, like, what do you need? And hands down, the overwhelming need was trustworthy immigration legal aid, because there are plenty of notarios and other, groups that just would take your money, say they're filing your asylum case, but not really. There wasn't a trustworthy group. And as we looked around at the other immigration services that there were in Northern Virginia, like I was saying earlier, there was a bunch that were sort of quick, like could help with an adjustment status or could help you renew your work visa. But there were very few spaces for those who could not afford applying for asylum, which is a very long and complicated and tedious process. Mm-hmm. And some of the people early on involved were social workers. And so it was their heart to not just provide this tangible help, but to really walk with people through that immigration legal aid process. And it is a long process. So other churches weren't doing it, and we felt compelled to do it, knowing it was going to be a heavy lift, but that's what we felt called for. And really, what better place for the church to come alongside these people in this long process and walk through them this whole part of the way. So RILA was formed. At first, we were a ministry under the church. Then we kind of got our own status, but it's tied to restoration status because we kind of outgrew. I mean, the Lord was blessing things. And 7 years later, like we were running 2 clinics a month. We now have more than 670 cases that we're carrying. And we had a volunteer pool of like 250 people who are on our email list that are willing to like come take notes, come take cases, bring a meal. So we've expanded beyond the Lord has blessed it. It's grown incredibly, which has been really exciting. And so therefore now we're living into RILA's mission is to really help those that are at their weakest, who have the most needs, who are often the most traumatized, and provide refuge for them in the form of legal protection. So if they have an option for legal status, we want to work towards that and help them work towards that. And then we can offer them. We see that as being part of like Christ provides refuge. And so we are providing care and refuge and protection for this often unprotected group. Now, we'll go back and say that when we first presented this to our vestry, we were very clear that we were just going to offer legal immigration aid. We weren't doing all legal aid because that's a slippery slope. Now, the reality is that when someone comes in and they need an adjustment status or they're applying for asylum, they have so many other legal needs. They might be not getting a fair deal in their wages, or they're getting exploited in their housing or something. But we feel called that our mission is legal immigration aid. And I think that's one of the reasons that our church embraced this ministry really wholeheartedly, kind of surprisingly, because at the time when this started in 2015, 2016, immigration was a pretty polarizing issue, and especially in Washington, D.C. And we found that it was a real blessing to be able to say, hey, we're going to offer legal immigration aid. We're not like scooping people and pushing them across the border and keeping them here illegally. No, we weren't being a sanctuary church or anything like that. We were seeing if people had a pathway in this complicated system, we wanted to be able to help move them, bring them refuge, and help them work towards legal status if they have a pathway. And a lot of people do have a pathway. It's just that the pathway is so confusing. I mean, I've got a couple of college degrees and I can't track all the changes in the immigration system, and I speak English as a first language. So that was our calling. And the church really got behind us, as you can see from this volunteer pool. And that's been incredibly exciting. Now, I will say, if it sounds all rosy and neat and, 7 years later, snap, 2 clinics, then we got 250 volunteers and all these lawyers and people are bringing meals and it's all great. It's not. It's been like an up and down road, and it's hard and it's messy. And I'm going to share like 3 current stories of clients just to give the idea of the decisions they're making and how difficult it is. Because again, they're not like me. I mean, they've been forced by circumstances, and these circumstances are just not like mine. So the first story that the RILA team has asked me to share, the staff's asked me to share, is Mariana. And she fled her country, but came to the States and found herself in a domestic abusive situation. And there's a visa for that. If you're being abused domestically, like if you're a victim of domestic abuse or a violent crime, you can apply for status to stay in the States. So RILA took her case, and it helped her apply for asylum, which she got. But she was a medical doctor in her home country, and the credentials, of course, don't change here at all, right? And so before she had status, before she could apply for a work permit, she really felt very unsafe and unshaky. She was caring for her daughter. But once she was able to apply for asylum and apply for a work permit, which you can do if your asylum case is pending, you can apply to get to work legally. And that is a real game changer for our clients, because they all want to work legally. I mean, the ones that we've seen. Then she could start working, and she started like as an administrator in a healthcare facility. So she has asylum, and she has her green card, and she's caring for her daughter, and she's in her field. Is she a doctor, practicing doctor? No, but she's slowly starting. And that's been really neat to see her come along. The second case is Ahmad. These are obviously not their real names. Ahmad, actually Mariana might be, but Ahmad is a former government official in the Afghan government. And so he had gone to the States, gone abroad for schooling, and he was really loyal, or he is really loyal to his country. However, his ideas of what would be good for Afghanistan didn't quite line up with the religious extremists who were taking over his country. He believed in democracy and freedom of speech and equal rights for women and men, and that did not go over well. So he had attempts on his life, and he knew he was in danger, but he really believed in helping Afghanistan. He really wanted to make his country a better place. He happened to be on a training in DC when the Taliban took over, when Kabul fell. So he said he woke up and realized he was homeless, that he'd never be able to go back. So RILA has helped him get a file for asylum, which he won pretty easily at that time. And this is all kind of a miracle, because the odds of getting asylum are actually pretty low in the States, depending on where you are. And so now he is there, but he's still really sad. He didn't want to leave his country, but he was forced to, right? The third is Sonia, who's from Honduras. And we have a lot of clients from that triangle in Central America. And she was frustrated by her government that when there were peaceful protests, the government was beating and exploiting the peaceful protesters, claiming they weren't peaceful and everything. And she documented it on social media. Big mistake. So she had to flee for her life with her daughter. And indeed, after she fled, her sister was captured and tortured and interrogated while they were looking for Sonia. Since then, her sister Anna's come to the States, and they're in the process of applying for asylum through RILA. So in each case, RILA staff has really leaned in and walked with these clients. And we find that, especially in like Mariana's case, when there's domestic abuse or something, our clients are A, traumatized, and B, conditioned to sort of give as little information as possible to the to an attorney or someone like that. So what was the situation in your home country? There were troubles. how was your son? He didn't go to school. Like they're very short. And so part of the giftings of our RILA staff and volunteers is to just walk with these people and provide a safe space so that then they can actually speak and talk about it. Because honestly, a judge isn't going to grant asylum based on we had troubles, but our clients need to have that safe space in order to share, in order to build a case. And honestly, what better place than the church to do that? Right? I mean, that's like a perfect calling of the church to be that caring, to be that safe space, to pray with people, to make them feel welcome, make them feel safe, and bring refuge. So now those cases are all pretty clear cut. Like you guys can all see, like, of course, Sonia had to flee. Of course, Mariana had to get out of that relationship. But even so, we see clients who make decisions that we don't always agree with. They have babies out of wedlock. They leave their kids behind. They leave their sister behind to be tortured while they're in the States, And so I was thinking, like, reflecting on how, like, they don't do what we think they should do, and we think we know how it should go. And come on, like, I was in a client meeting earlier this summer, and this woman fled her country. I think it was also Honduras, and she had been left because she was advocating for boys not to join gangs. Well, she comes to the States and her teenage son joins a gang. And she just, and we're all like, oh, but then I was reminded, like I was rereading John 8:11, where he like draws the line in the stand. They have the woman's about to be stoned who was caught in adultery. And like Jesus often doesn't react like we think one would react, so I feel like that's what we constantly are trying to do in RILA, is like not react how we might normally react, and just sort of look at the bigger picture and step back and just allow things to unfold. Now, people at RILA, we are not Jesus, of course, and we fail all the time, and it's messy. So you might think that because of this, people in our church, especially because it's so divisive, would not step up to volunteer. But we found the opposite has been true. People are clamoring to come and love on our clients and understand their needs and show compassion, even if they don't agree with having a baby out of wedlock or leaving a kid behind or, getting involved with gangs. So we've been really excited about that. And so it's grown and it's transformed our church. Like our church, we talk about RILA pretty regularly from the front. I mean, not me, I'm not up front, but like our rector or our staff or like the church staff. And we've had RILA clients now coming to restoration. So while it's not like flocks of immigrants in Arlington are coming to our white church, like there are a few, it's coming. It's slowly by slowly changing the DNA of our church. And we're really excited about that. But honestly, I'm even more excited by the fact that we get volunteers who would never darken the door of a church on a Sunday. But for example, I tell you, I kid you not, one time I was volunteering and there was this woman. I'm like, hey, what service do you go to at Restoration? She's like, oh, I don't go here. I'm like, oh, really? How'd you find it? She's like, well, I have a friend who came to visit another friend one time in Restoration, and she said your guy at the front, like I think she called him, I don't know if she called him a priest or a bishop, like she clearly wasn't like a church person. He mentioned something and my friend said, hey, I think you might get involved in doing this, because she was a lawyer, wanted to do something, And I think that's really cool when we can have that. And we made the decision to not have a statement of faith for our volunteers. And that was a little bit fought by the vestry, who kind of wanted that, but we realized like, wait, this is a teaching opportunity for our neighbors to see our church as reaching out, and this is why we do it. Because I could be like, oh, I do this because, I believe it's Jesus' call to like help the sojourner. And great, where do you live? How many kids do you have? Like just sort of, as our rector says, like say you love Jesus and then act normal, And so that's a chance for us to do that. So it's just really exciting for that. So all of that is to say that like when all of us, both the non-restoration or non-Christian volunteers, the volunteers the clients, some who are believers before, some who aren't, all come together. I feel like our church as a whole, our empathy is growing, because as we get closer to these folks who have experienced incredible trauma, our empathy grows, and they don't just become someone who like had a baby out of wedlock and decided to take the train across the border, take that terrible train and jump and all the horrific things you do to get to the border, and put their baby's life in danger or whatever. We start to understand. I mean, you don't fully understand them, but, and I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I really believe that when I interact with those scenarios, those messes, those decisions, those complicated people, their complicated lives, my life is complicated, that I feel like I get a better understanding of God, who God really is, because it's expanded my vision of how he can be reflected in somebody else. So our goal at RILA is like, wow, we would love for every church to have this really invigorating experience in your small church, or big church, or any church, or community, because it has just done so much for the life of our church, and we're really proud of it, and it's really brought our church along, and we would love that for everyone else. And it doesn't have to be a full-on immigration legal aid clinic with 2 clinics a week and 670 cases and more work than we ever knew we'd have to do. But I would encourage you to just, again, take small steps and see who your neighbors are and what they need. And maybe it's not even legal aid, but it's been such a joy for us to watch it just grow, surprisingly. And I would wish that for you all. And maybe some of your churches are already doing that. So now I'd love to open it up and just see, here's what I was just saying, that what are your churches doing and how can we collaborate or whatever, and just would love to hear your stories with the few minutes we have left.